friends, and welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Haunted Victorian, where I recount true paranormal experiences that happened to me and my family in an old haunted house in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. If this is your first time joining us, I'll make sure to link all of the other episodes in the description box below so you can go back and listen to the story from the beginning. And on this episode, I would like to tell you the tale of the well. So some of you may have already heard parts of this story because I told it as part of a collaboration video for Valentine's Day that I did earlier this year with Harpies in the Trees, the Bookubus, and a few other of my booktube friends. But in this episode, I wanted to fill in some of the gaps of that story because in that collaboration video we were under time constraints, so I did edit it down a little bit to fit into that. So I wanted to fill in some of the gaps so you get the full picture of the story. So as I've mentioned before, my family moved into this house on Samhain Eve, October 31st of 1979, and this was before I was born. So this was my mom, my dad, and my older brother, and my brother was 7 years old at the time. And this house was absolutely beautiful. If you want to hear a full layout of the house, I do go through that in episode 1, but just with all of the grandiose of this Victorian home, it was just the cherry on top of it was that my family moved in on Halloween, and the house is also located just across the street from one of the oldest cemeteries in St. John's. So its location and its history just made for a perfect place to have haunting experiences. And this part of the story mainly involves a situation that was happening with my older brother. So my older brother was always an active child, but before they moved into this house, they were living in a small apartment, and he had never experienced any sleepwalking before they moved into this house. But almost right from the minute they stepped across the threshold, my brother would start sleepwalking every single night. And that's not unusual for a child his age, but the circumstances of his sleepwalking was definitely spooky. So, like I said, pretty much from the get-go, from the first night that they moved in, my brother would get up out of bed, walk down the 2 sets of stairs, and out through the 3 front doors. So as I've described on the channel before, the front doors, we had a screen door and then a heavy wooden door which led into the foyer area, and then there was another inside door that had a plexiglass window in it, and when you would open and close that door it would rattle in the frame. So very, very distinctive sounds. And so one night my parents were up asleep in bed, of course, and it was exactly 2:15 in the morning, and my mom heard, "Mommy, Mommy," coming from outside, and he was speaking no louder than what I'm speaking now, and she bolted from a dead sleep because she knew that somehow my brother had gotten out of the house without them knowing. And she woke up my father and, was saying that my brother had gotten out of the house, and he always joked because he said, "Have you ever tried to pull on a pair of jeans while you're running down the stairs at the same time?" So they went out, and he was standing quite a ways away on the neighbor's front lawn, and he was looking up at their house and just very quietly calling, "Mommy." And that's a name that neither my brother or I have ever used for my mom. It's always been Mom or Mama. We never ever called her Mommy. So that was the first freaky thing. But the other thing was that this was in late fall, and at this time, of course, in eastern Canada, there's often snow on the ground and it's extremely damp and cold. So my brother was out there just in his little boxer shorts and, ankle deep in snow, calling out for Mom. And when my parents went out, my dad was very cautious, of course, because he knew that you're not supposed to wake up someone who is sleepwalking. and he called out to him just very, very gently. And my brother turned, and his eyes were frozen into kind of big saucers. And he looked at him and he said, "What?" And my dad said, "Come on now, it's time to come inside. It's cold out." And it took a little bit of coaxing, but they finally got him in, wrapped him up in a blanket, and put him back to bed. So like I said, this wasn't really overly scary. You're probably saying, well, you know, what's paranormal about that? But you also have to remember that the staircase, the main staircase in the house, was very, very creaky. And the creaks and squeaks and groans would echo throughout the house, and you could hear it no matter where you were. So my brother always managed to get out of his room, down over 2 sets of stairs, and out 3 heavy doors without making a sound, to signal to the family that he was awake and he was going outside. So that was the first thing that was really spooky. So this kept happening kind of night after night, and it always happened at exactly 2:15 in the morning. Every single time it was 2:15. So after the first couple of nights, my dad decided to install one of those safety locks with the chain on the front door, and he put it up high enough so that my brother, who was still quite small at the time, even if he stood on a chair, he wouldn't be able to reach the chain. So we had the main lock on the door, then a deadbolt, a chain on top, and then there was a lock, a little lock on the screen door as well on the outside. So they were sure that after they put all of these locks on the door that he wouldn't get out. And to their surprise, that night, again, he got out through all 3 doors. They have no idea how he undid the top lock and managed to get out, and he was walking up the street. This time he was almost knee-deep in snow, calling out, "Mommy." So they didn't know how this was happening, how he was reaching the chain on the top of the door. The other locks, you know, you can kind of say, okay, well, he can get to those. But the chain, there was absolutely no way he'd be able to undo it. So at this time, my parents were also experiencing other paranormal things that were going on in the house as well. So my mom had it in her head that maybe the spirits were somehow interfering with my brother and getting him outside to walk up the street. So they had a fisherman friend of theirs who had to go to work super duper early in the morning to go out and fish. So they asked him, would he mind driving through their neighborhood on the way down to the docks to see if they could find my brother. And indeed, on more than one occasion, he used to keep a blanket in the backseat of his truck. And there was even one time that he caught him at the top of our street, and he was turning the corner to go up onto a neighboring street. So they were really scared at this point because they thought that one of these times he's going to get out and he's going to get too far and they're not going to be able to find him, or somebody else is going to pick him up. And then to top everything off, my mother had a conversation with an older lady who lived up the road, and this was, like I said, just after they moved in, and this older lady was there. She lived in her house while the well-off family who originally owned our Victorian home was still living there. And she recounted to my mother the story of a 7-year-old little girl who was living in the house at the time. And one day she went out into the yard, and they had a well that serviced that whole area in their yard, and someone had left the lid off of the well. So back in those days, you would have a lid that you could take on and off or open and close so that, you know, you wouldn't get animals and insects and stuff like that down in your drinking water. And somehow she managed to fall into the well, and she either froze to death or drowned. And apparently it was a extremely hard blow for that family. They were absolutely devastated, as you can imagine. And it was a situation where the mother that lived in the house at that time kind of never really got over that death, from what this woman was telling my mom. But what makes this story even more interesting was that little girl was 7 years old, and my brother was also 7 years old. So this was a really interesting twist to this story, and the pieces kind of started to fall together for my parents, because of course, as I've told in one of the previous episodes, my mom was also seeing the specter of a woman in black. It wasn't only my mother, some other people have seen her as well. It was a specter of a woman who was dressed in all black Victorian mourning clothes with a veil, and she was seen on many occasions floating throughout the house. So it wasn't like she was even walking. She would literally float through the house. And when my mom was coming down over the stairs one day, she was coming out of what we called the playroom and floated across and went down the hallway towards the kitchen area. And in the playroom, it was also the family's library who lived there before us. And back in those days, like I said before, if someone died, they would be laid out and waked in the house. And it was in that library area that my mom saw the woman floating out of. That's where they would have waked the bodies. So again, all of the pieces started to come together about kind of what was going on here. And of course, at this time, there was no proof that that happened. But of course, my mother believed this older lady that lived up the street because she was there when it happened. So my mother started thinking that just perhaps the woman that she was seeing dressed all in black was the mother of this little girl who had died in the well in the backyard. And maybe the spirit of the little girl was also stuck in the spirit realm, but her and her mother couldn't find each other, and that the little girl was using my brother almost and getting him out of the house and having him call out to mommy because she was looking for her own mother. And of course, we don't know this, it's just a theory, but all of this seems to fit together really, really well. It is a very curious situation. And my parents eventually were able to break my brother of his sleepwalking habit of getting out of the house when my father rigged up a kind of homemade alarm system so that they would know when he was coming out of his room, and they would wake up and go out and get him and bring him back to bed. So the following spring, my dad was out in the yard digging holes to put in a new fence. And he made a discovery and called my mom out into the backyard. And she's always said that she got shivers from head to toe because he had uncovered a large iron ring that would have been used to go on top of an old well. So from that point on, my mom kind of knew that the story of the little girl who drowned in the well was 100% true, and that it was likely the mother that they were seeing in the house who was devastated by the death. And of course, the curiosity between the little girl having died at 7 years old and my brother when he moved into the house was also 7 years old at the time. So that is the story of the well, and my parents, their friends and family, everyone pretty much who went into the house were experiencing a high level of paranormal activity on a regular basis until my mom had me in July of 1982, so 3 years after they moved into the house. And it was very strange because everyone knew that the house was haunted. Still to this day has a reputation in St. John's for being a haunted house. So when my mom had me and she brought me home, from the minute I crossed the threshold, she always said that the house was settled. No one had any more paranormal experiences after the day that I was brought home after I was born. But I didn't tell my family until years later about my own paranormal experiences that I was having in the house. So it seems that for whatever reason, the spirits decided that they were going to communicate with me rather than everyone else, and I will tell you those experiences in the next episode. So there you have it. That is the story of the well. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to like this video and leave me a comment down below, because you know I love chatting with you guys. But until next time, sweet dreams, everybody.